The day I buried my grandmother, I was the only one who didn't cry. I stood at the edge of that freshly dug grave, watching the mahogany casket descend into the earth, and I felt nothing but relief. The priest spoke of her kindness, her devotion to family, her charitable heart. He called her a pillar of the community, a woman who lived for her grandchildren, a saint walking among ordinary people. And as I listened to those beautiful lies float into the cold November air, I thought about how easy it is to fool everyone when you've had 76 years to perfect your mask. My name is Sophie Reynolds, and this is the story of how my grandmother systematically destroyed everything my family ever built, how she manipulated us like puppets on invisible strings, and how I uncovered the truth that nobody wanted to believe. This is also the story of how I made sure the world finally saw her for exactly what she was before she took her final breath. Some people might call what I did cruel. Some might say I went too far. But when you understand what she did to my father, to my mother, to my brother, and to me, you'll understand why I had no choice but to expose the woman we all called Grandma Maggie. I need to start from the beginning because to understand the depth of her betrayal, you need to understand how completely we trusted her. How utterly devoted we were to this woman who sat at the head of every holiday table, who baked cookies that smelled like love itself, who tucked me into bed with stories about fairies and princes and always reminded me that family was everything. I grew up in a modest 3-bedroom house in Westbrook, Connecticut. My father, Thomas, owned a small but successful plumbing business that his own father had started back in the 1960s. My mother, Claire, had been a nurse before I was born, but she gave up her career to raise me and my younger brother, Daniel. We weren't wealthy, but we were comfortable. More importantly, we were happy. At least, that's what I believed for the first 28 years of my life. Grandma Maggie lived just 7 minutes away in the house where my father had grown up. After my grandfather died when I was 12, she became the gravitational center of our entire family. Every Sunday dinner was at her house. Every birthday, every holiday, every celebration happened under her roof. She had this way of making you feel like the most important person in the world when she looked at you. Her eyes would crinkle at the corners, and she'd cup your face in her soft, wrinkled hands, and she'd tell you that you were special, that you were her favorite, that she loved you more than anything. The twisted thing is, I believe she said that to all of us. To me, to Daniel, to my father, to my cousins. She made each of us feel uniquely loved, uniquely favored, and we all kept that secret favoritism to ourselves, carrying it like a precious gift, never realizing that she was playing us against each other from the very beginning. My father worshipped her. Thomas Reynolds was the kind of man who would do anything for his mother, and I do mean anything. When she called at 2 a.m. because she heard a noise outside, he would drive over in his pajamas to check every corner of her property. When she needed her gutters cleaned, her lawn mowed, her car serviced, he was there before she finished asking. He paid her property taxes when she claimed she couldn't afford them. He bought her a new refrigerator when hers broke down. He even took out a second mortgage on our house to help her with what she called unexpected medical bills. I was too young to understand any of this when it was happening. I just saw a loving son taking care of his elderly mother, the way all good children should. My mother saw something different, but she kept her concerns to herself for years, pushing them down, convincing herself that she was being paranoid or selfish for resenting the money and attention that flowed endlessly toward Grandma Maggie. The first crack appeared when I was 28 years old. I had been teaching 3rd grade for 5 years at that point, living in a small apartment about 20 minutes from my parents' house. I was engaged to a wonderful man named Kevin, and life felt full of possibility. Then my mother called me one evening in late October, and her voice was shaking so badly that I almost didn't recognize it. She told me that my father had just confessed something to her. For the past 15 years, he had been giving money to Grandma Maggie. Not just a little money here and there, but substantial amounts, thousands and thousands of dollars. He had hidden it from my mother by manipulating the business accounts, by taking cash payments from customers and never recording them, by slowly draining their savings and retirement funds without her knowledge. The total amount, as best as my mother could calculate, was somewhere around $340,000. I remember sitting down on my kitchen floor, my back against the refrigerator, trying to process what I was hearing. $340,000. That was more than my parents' house was worth. That was my brother's college fund, my parents' retirement, their security, their future. Gone. All of it given to a woman who lived alone in a fully paid-off house, who drove a nice car, who never seemed to want for anything. My mother was crying, asking me what they should do. She said my father was devastated that he was finally seeing what he had done, that Grandma Maggie had convinced him over and over again that she needed the money, that she would lose her house without it, that she would end up on the street. She had played on his guilt and his love and his desperate need to be a good son, and she had bled him dry. I told my mother I would come over the next morning. I told her we would figure this out together. But that night, lying awake in my bed while Kevin slept peacefully beside me, I started to think. I started to remember things. Small things. Insignificant things. Moments that had seemed completely normal at the time, but now, viewed through this new lens of betrayal, took on a darker meaning. I remembered being 16 and overhearing Grandma Maggie on the phone with my father. She had been crying, telling him that the bank was threatening to foreclose, that she had nowhere to turn, that she would die of shame if anyone found out. My father had promised to help, promised to take care of everything. I had thought it was so beautiful, this display of family loyalty. Now I wondered how many times she had made that same call, how many different crises she had invented to extract money from my father's trusting hands. I remembered being 22, home from college for Thanksgiving, and watching Grandma Maggie comfort my mother after a small argument about dinner preparations. My mother had burnt the gravy, and she was embarrassed, and Grandma Maggie had pulled her aside and spoken to her in low, soothing tones. At the time, I thought she was being kind. But I also remembered my mother's face afterward, how she had seemed smaller somehow, diminished, like something had been taken from her. What had Grandma Maggie actually said in that private moment? I remembered being 25 and Daniel announcing that he was changing his major from engineering to business, because Grandma Maggie had told him he was meant for greater things, that engineering was too limiting for someone with his potential. My parents had been concerned about the switch, but Daniel had been adamant, and Grandma Maggie had supported him so vocally that they eventually backed down. Daniel had struggled ever since, never quite finding his footing, always chasing opportunities that Grandma Maggie suggested, but that never seemed to pan out. These memories haunted me through the night, and by morning, I had made a decision. I was going to find out exactly what Grandma Maggie had done with $340,000. I was going to discover why she had systematically stolen from her own son, and I was going to make sure that whatever I found, the truth would come out. The next morning, I drove to my parents' house. My father was sitting at the kitchen table, looking like he had aged 10 years overnight. His eyes were red-rimmed and hollow, and he couldn't meet my gaze when I walked in. My mother sat beside him, her hand on his arm, her own face drawn and pale. They looked like survivors of a disaster, which in many ways they were. I sat down across from them and asked my father to tell me everything. He resisted at first, ashamed and broken, but I pressed him. I told him I wasn't there to judge, that I loved him, that we were going to fix this together. Slowly, painfully, the story came out. It had started just a year after my grandfather died. Grandma Maggie had called my father distraught, saying that she had just discovered Grandpa had left behind massive debts, credit cards, personal loans, a second mortgage she never knew about. She was terrified, she said, ashamed. She begged my father not to tell anyone, especially not my mother, who she said would judge her harshly. My father, grieving for his own father and desperate to protect his mother, had agreed to help. He started giving her $500 a month, then $1,000, then $2,000. Every time he tried to pull back, she would call crying, saying the creditors were threatening her, saying she couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, couldn't go on. She would remind him of everything she had sacrificed for him growing up, all the times she had put him first, all the love she had given. She would tell him that he was her only hope, that everyone else had abandoned her, that he was the only one who truly understood. The amounts grew larger over the years. There were emergencies, surgeries she claimed insurance wouldn't cover, a burst pipe that caused thousands in water damage, a car that needed replacing when her old one became unsafe. Every crisis required money, and my father provided it. He refinanced the house twice without telling my mother. He dipped into the college funds. He neglected his own retirement contributions. He did all of this in secret, carrying the burden alone, because Grandma Maggie had convinced him that secrecy was essential, that people wouldn't understand, that it would tear the family apart if anyone found out. And she was right about that last part, at least. The secret had finally come out because my father's accountant had discovered irregularities during tax preparation and insisted on an explanation. My father had no choice but to confess to my mother, and now here we were, sitting in the ruins of everything they had built together. I asked my father if he had any proof of where the money had gone. Did Grandma Maggie ever show him the debts, the medical bills, the repair estimates? He shook his head slowly, and I watched something break behind his eyes as he admitted that she had never shown him a single document. He had simply believed her, because she was his mother, because he loved her, because he couldn't imagine that she would lie. My mother spoke up then, her voice bitter in a way I had never heard before. She told me that this was just the financial part, that there was more, so much more. She said that over the years, Grandma Maggie had systematically poisoned her marriage, undermined her parenting, isolated her from her own family. She said she had spent decades feeling like she wasn't good enough, like she was failing as a wife and mother, and only now was she starting to understand why. Grandma Maggie had been whispering in her ear for 30 years, little comments disguised as concern. "Thomas seems so stressed lately, Claire. Are you making sure he's eating properly?" Or, "I noticed Sophie's grades dropped last semester. You know, when I raised Thomas, I always made sure to check his homework every night." Or, "Daniel seems so distant. Sometimes children pull away when they don't feel enough attention at home." Each comment was small enough to dismiss, but they accumulated over time, eroding my mother's confidence, making her doubt herself, making her feel perpetually inadequate. And whenever my mother tried to set boundaries or push back against Grandma Maggie's involvement in their lives, my father would take his mother's side, because Grandma Maggie had already laid the groundwork, had already told him privately that Claire was jealous, that Claire resented their closeness, that Claire was trying to come between them. I listened to all of this, and my heart broke for both of them. But even as I grieved for what they had lost, a cold determination was taking root inside me. I needed evidence. I needed proof. Before I confronted my grandmother, I needed to understand the full scope of what she had done. I made a decision that day that would change everything. I decided to start investigating my grandmother's life, quietly and carefully, without her knowing. I would find out where the money had gone. I would uncover the truth about her supposed debts and emergencies. And I would document everything, so that when the time came for a reckoning, there would be no room for denial. The first step was to talk to my brother, Daniel. He was 3 years younger than me, and we had always been close growing up, but we had drifted apart in recent years. He spent more time with Grandma Maggie than anyone else in the family, visiting her several times a week, taking her shopping, accompanying her to doctor's appointments. If anyone knew the truth about her finances, it might be him. I called Daniel that evening and asked if we could meet for coffee. He sounded surprised but agreed, and we met the next day at a small cafe near his apartment. He looked good, better than I had expected. He had recently started a new job at a real estate agency, and he seemed optimistic about his prospects. I made small talk for a few minutes, then carefully steered the conversation toward Grandma Maggie. What happened next surprised me. Daniel's face lit up when I mentioned her, and he started talking about how wonderful she was, how she was the only person in the family who really believed in him, how she had encouraged him to pursue his dreams when everyone else doubted him. He told me she had been helping him financially, giving him small loans to tide him over between commission checks, never pressuring him to pay her back. My blood ran cold. She was giving Daniel money? The same money she had taken from our father? I kept my expression neutral, but inside I was reeling. She wasn't just stealing from my father. She was using that stolen money to buy my brother's loyalty, to make herself into his savior and benefactor while simultaneously positioning our parents as the ones who didn't believe in him. I asked Daniel, as casually as I could, how Grandma Maggie could afford to help him out. Wasn't she on a fixed income? Didn't she struggle to make ends meet? Daniel laughed and waved his hand dismissively. He said Grandma was doing fine, that she was actually quite comfortable. She had investments, he said, and she owned a rental property that brought in steady income. She had just always been private about money, not wanting to seem boastful. A rental property. Investments. I kept my face calm, but my mind was racing. This didn't match anything my father had told me, anything we had been led to believe for years. I asked Daniel where the rental property was, and he said it was a small house on the other side of town, something Grandpa had bought decades ago as an investment. Grandma Maggie collected rent from the tenants every month. That night, I started digging. I went to the county assessor's website and searched property records. What I found made me physically sick. My grandmother owned not one but 3 properties in addition to her home. One was the rental house Daniel had mentioned. Another was a small commercial building that housed a dry cleaner and a barber shop. The third was a vacant lot on the edge of town. I calculated the potential rental income from these properties and came up with a conservative estimate of at least $4,000 per month. That was $48,000 a year, on top of her Social Security and whatever pension my grandfather had left her. She wasn't struggling. She had never been struggling. The debts, the emergencies, the desperate phone calls to my father, all of it had been lies. But where was the money my father had given her? I needed to find out, and I knew I couldn't do it alone. I needed help from someone who understood finances, someone who could access records I couldn't get to on my own. I thought about hiring a private investigator, but I was a teacher, and my savings were modest. Then I remembered my college roommate, Valerie, who worked as a forensic accountant for a major firm in Hartford. I had stayed in touch with her over the years, and she owed me a favor from the time I had helped her move across the country with almost no notice. I called Valerie and explained the situation, keeping it vague at first, just saying that I suspected my grandmother of financial manipulation and needed help understanding her assets. Valerie was intrigued and agreed to help. Over the next few weeks, she taught me how to search for financial records, how to interpret property documents, and how to track money through public and semi-public sources. What we discovered was staggering. Over the past 15 years, my grandmother had accumulated significant wealth through a combination of rental income, careful investments, and, of course, the money she had extracted from my father. She had a brokerage account with over $200,000 in stocks and bonds. She had a money market account with another $100,000 in savings. Her properties were all fully paid off and increasing in value. And yet she had continued to tell my father that she was on the brink of financial ruin, continued to cry and beg and manipulate, continued to drain him of everything he had worked for. The woman was worth close to $1 million, and she had destroyed my parents' financial future without a moment of hesitation. I printed everything Valerie and I had found and put it in a folder, but I knew I wasn't done yet. The financial betrayal was devastating enough, but my mother's words haunted me. She had said there was more, that Grandma Maggie had done things beyond stealing money. I needed to understand the full picture before I made my next move. I started paying closer attention to family dynamics, especially at the weekly Sunday dinners at Grandma Maggie's house that I still attended, despite what I now knew. I watched her interact with everyone, and once I knew what to look for, I saw the manipulation everywhere. She complimented Daniel constantly, praising his ambition, his intelligence, his potential. But the compliments always came with subtle digs at our parents. "You're so driven, Daniel. I don't know where you got it from, certainly not from your father, who was always content with the bare minimum." She would laugh as she said it, making it sound like a harmless joke, but I saw how Daniel internalized the message. He was special, and our parents were ordinary. She treated my mother with a kind of patronizing sweetness that made my skin crawl now that I recognized it. She would correct my mother's cooking with a gentle smile. She would rearrange the table settings after my mother had already set them, saying, "Let me just fix this, dear," as if my mother were a child who couldn't be trusted with simple tasks. She would ask my mother about her little hobbies, while making it clear that her own pursuits were far more sophisticated and meaningful. And my father, my poor broken father, she kept on the tightest leash of all. She would touch his arm constantly, lean on him, tell him she didn't know what she would do without him, She would remind him of sacrifices she claimed to have made when he was young, how she had given up her dreams to raise him, how she had worked herself to the bone to give him a good life. The guilt poured from her in calculated waves, keeping him trapped in an endless cycle of obligation. One Sunday, I arrived early to help with dinner preparations and found myself alone with my grandmother in her kitchen. She was chopping vegetables, her movements slow but precise, and she looked up at me with that familiar warm smile that I now knew was nothing but a mask. "Sophie, my darling girl," she said, "come sit with me. We hardly ever get time alone anymore." I sat down at her kitchen table and she started talking about the family, about how worried she was about my father's health, about how my mother seemed distant lately, about how she hoped Daniel would finally settle down and find a nice girl. She talked, and I listened, and I realized she was doing what she had always done, gathering information, planting seeds, positioning herself at the center of everything. Then she said something that stopped my heart. She told me, her voice dripping with false concern, that she was worried about my parents' marriage. She said she had noticed tension between them lately, and she wondered if my mother might be hiding something. "You know how secretive Claire can be," she said. "I've always thought there was something about her, something not quite right. I just want your father to be happy." I looked at this woman, this grandmother I had loved and trusted my entire life, and I saw her clearly for the first time. She wasn't just a manipulator. She was a destroyer. She had spent decades systematically tearing down everyone around her, keeping herself at the center of a web of lies and secrets, feeding on the pain and confusion she created. And she had no intention of ever stopping. I excused myself and went to the bathroom, where I splashed cold water on my face and stared at my reflection in the mirror. I made a decision in that moment. I would not just expose her. I would make sure she faced real consequences. I would make sure everyone understood exactly what she had done. And I would do it in a way that she couldn't lie or manipulate her way out of. But I knew I had to be careful. My grandmother was smart, and she had been playing these games for longer than I had been alive. If I confronted her directly, she would deny everything. She would turn the family against me. She would paint me as the villain, the ungrateful granddaughter who was trying to tear the family apart. I needed allies, I needed evidence, and I needed a plan. The first person I brought into my confidence was Kevin, my fiancé. I had been keeping him at arm's length from all of this, not wanting to burden him with my family's dysfunction. But that night, I told him everything. I showed him the documents, explained the manipulation, described the Sunday dinners where I had sat silent and watchful. Kevin listened without interrupting, and when I finished, he took my hands in his and told me he was with me, whatever I decided to do. The second person I approached was my mother. I went to her house when my father was at work and laid everything out on the kitchen table. The property records, the financial statements, the evidence that Grandma Maggie had been wealthy all along. My mother looked at the papers and tears streamed down her face, but there was something else in her eyes too. Relief, validation. For the first time in 30 years, she had proof that she wasn't crazy, that her instincts about her mother-in-law had been right all along. She told me stories then, stories she had never shared before. She told me about the day before her wedding when Grandma Maggie had taken her aside and told her she wasn't good enough for Thomas, that he deserved better, that she would be watching Claire's every move. She told me about the years of subtle sabotage, the way Grandma Maggie would forget to invite her to family events, the way she would schedule things when Claire was working, and then act surprised when she couldn't attend. She told me about the time she had found Grandma Maggie going through her personal documents in her own home, and when she confronted her, Grandma Maggie had turned it around and accused Claire of being paranoid and hostile. The hardest part for my mother was knowing that my father had been complicit in some of this, even if unintentionally. He had always defended his mother, always taken her side, always made Claire feel like the outsider in her own family. My mother said she had almost left him a dozen times, but she had stayed for me and Daniel, for the life they had built together, for the hope that things would eventually change. I asked her if she was ready to confront Grandma Maggie, and she hesitated. She was afraid, I realized, afraid of what my father would do, afraid that the confrontation would destroy what was left of her marriage, afraid that Grandma Maggie would somehow win again. I understood her fear, but I also knew that we couldn't let this go on any longer. I told my mother about my plan, and slowly, reluctantly, she agreed to help. But she made me promise one thing. We would give my father a chance first. We would show him everything and let him decide how to proceed. If he chose to protect his mother, then we would know where we stood. But if he chose us, his wife and children, then we would face this together as a family. I agreed, and we set a date for the conversation. The following Saturday, I brought all my documents to my parents' house. Kevin came with me for support. Daniel was conspicuously absent. I hadn't told him anything yet, knowing he would run straight to Grandma Maggie if he suspected what was coming. My father looked at the property records with an expression of pure confusion. He kept saying there must be some mistake, that his mother had always told him she had nothing, that she lived month to month on her Social Security. I showed him the investment accounts, the bank statements, the rental income. I showed him the math, how the money he had given her over 15 years had been not just unnecessary, but actively converted into her personal wealth. The realization hit him slowly, like a tide coming in. His face went through a series of emotions: disbelief, confusion, pain, and finally a rage I had never seen before. He stood up from the table so fast his chair fell over. He paced the room, his hands shaking, his voice rising as he processed the magnitude of the betrayal. "She told me she would lose her house," he said, over and over. "She told me she would be on the street. She cried, she begged. How could she do this to me? I'm her son. I'm her only son. How could she do this?" I let him rage, let him cry, let him grieve for the mother he thought he knew. When he finally calmed down, I told him there was more. I told him about the manipulation of my mother, the years of psychological warfare, the way Grandma Maggie had systematically undermined their marriage. My mother confirmed everything, speaking more openly than she ever had before, finally giving voice to the pain she had carried in silence for so long. My father listened, and something in him broke completely. He sobbed like a child, apologizing to my mother, apologizing to me, begging forgiveness for being so blind. My mother held him, and they cried together, and I watched as my parents reconnected in their shared grief and anger. When the tears were spent, my father asked what we should do, and that's when I told him my plan. I had spent weeks thinking about this, working through every scenario. Simply confronting Grandma Maggie wouldn't work. She would deny everything, manipulate the situation, play the victim. No, we needed to expose her in a way that she couldn't escape, in front of witnesses who would see through her lies. The opportunity came in the form of her 77th birthday, which was 3 weeks away. Every year, she hosted a large party at her house, inviting not just family, but friends, neighbors, members of her church. It was her favorite day of the year, the day when everyone gathered to celebrate and adore her. This year, I planned to give her a very different kind of celebration. The weeks leading up to the party were tense but focused. I worked with Valerie to prepare a comprehensive presentation of the financial evidence. I talked to my mother about specific incidents of manipulation that we could document, and I reached out to someone unexpected: my grandmother's next-door neighbor, Patricia, a woman who had known her for over 40 years. Patricia had always seemed friendly with Grandma Maggie, but when I spoke to her privately, she revealed a very different picture. She told me that Grandma Maggie had been responsible for ending her marriage decades ago, spreading rumors about Patricia's husband that turned out to be completely false. Patricia had never been able to prove it, but she knew. She told me about other people in the neighborhood who had been targets of Grandma Maggie's manipulation, how she had turned friends against each other, how she had hoarded information and used it as a weapon. Patricia was more than willing to help. So were a few other people I tracked down, people who had suffered from Grandma Maggie's machinations over the years, and had been waiting for someone to finally call her out. The day of the birthday party arrived. I woke up with a knot in my stomach, a mixture of fear and anticipation. Kevin held me close and reminded me that I was doing the right thing, that my grandmother had left us no choice, that sometimes the only way to defeat a liar is to shine a light so bright that the shadows have nowhere to hide. We arrived at Grandma Maggie's house early to help with the setup, playing our roles perfectly. My father was quiet, his face carefully neutral. My mother stayed close to him, drawing strength from his presence. Daniel was there too, oblivious to what was coming, laughing and joking with Grandma Maggie as if the world hadn't shifted beneath his feet. I had debated telling Daniel beforehand, but I ultimately decided against it. He was too close to Grandma Maggie, too dependent on her approval and her money. I didn't trust him not to warn her. It was a painful choice, knowing my brother would be blindsided, but I believed it was necessary. The guests began arriving around noon. Church friends, old neighbors, distant relatives, everyone came to pay tribute to Grandma Maggie on her special day. She held court in her living room, accepting gifts and compliments with gracious humility, playing her role to perfection. Every now and then she would catch my eye and smile, and I would smile back, wondering if she had any idea what was coming. At 2 o'clock, after everyone had eaten and the cake had been served, I asked for everyone's attention. Grandma Maggie looked surprised but pleased, assuming I was about to give a toast in her honor. The room fell silent, and all eyes turned to me. I began by thanking everyone for coming, by acknowledging the many years of memories we had all shared with my grandmother. I spoke about family, about trust, about the bonds that are supposed to hold us together through thick and thin. A few people nodded approvingly, expecting the standard birthday tribute. Then I said something that made the room go still. But I've recently learned that the woman we're here to celebrate today has been lying to all of us for as long as I can remember, and I think it's time the truth came out. Grandma Maggie's smile froze. Her eyes narrowed, and I saw a flash of something dangerous behind them, but she kept her composure. "Sophie, dear, what on earth are you talking about?" I pulled out the folder I had hidden behind a chair and began laying documents on the coffee table. Property records, financial statements, bank records. I explained, clearly and methodically, what each document showed. I revealed the 3 properties my grandmother owned, the rental income she collected, the investment accounts she had grown fat with my father's stolen money. The room was absolutely silent. People stared at the papers, then at my grandmother, then back at me. Grandma Maggie's face had gone pale, but she tried to maintain control. "These are lies," she said, her voice shaking with manufactured outrage. "Sophie has been troubled lately. I don't know what's gotten into her, but this is all a misunderstanding." I turned to my father. "Dad, do you want to tell them, or should I?" My father stood up, and his voice was steady in a way I hadn't heard in months. He told the room about the 15 years of payments he had made to his mother, the emergencies that never existed, the debts that were pure fabrication. He told them about the second mortgages, the drained retirement accounts, the financial ruin that now faced him and my mother because of his mother's greed. Grandma Maggie tried to interrupt, but my mother spoke up for the first time, her voice clear and strong. She told the room about the years of psychological manipulation, the constant undermining, the isolation from her own family. She named specific incidents, specific words, specific moments when Grandma Maggie had torn her down while pretending to build her up. Patricia, the neighbor, stood up and added her voice to the chorus. She told her story, the destroyed marriage, the years of wondering if she was imagining things. Other people began to nod, to murmur, to share their own experiences with whispered confirmations. Grandma Maggie looked around the room, searching for allies, but found none. For the first time in her life, she was completely alone. The mask had slipped, and everyone could see what was underneath. "You ungrateful little witch," she hissed at me, dropping all pretense of kindness. "After everything I've done for this family, everything I sacrificed, and this is how you repay me?" I looked at her steadily. "You sacrificed nothing. You took everything. And now everyone knows the truth." The party dissolved into chaos. People left quickly, uncomfortable with what they had witnessed. Daniel sat frozen in a corner, his face a mask of shock and denial. He kept looking at Grandma Maggie, waiting for her to explain, to make it all make sense, but she was too busy trying to salvage her reputation, too busy scrambling to control the narrative. But it was too late for that. The evidence was out. The witnesses had seen. The truth had finally been spoken. In the weeks that followed, the consequences unfolded with devastating precision. Grandma Maggie's friends stopped calling. Her church group asked her not to return, politely but firmly. The community that had once celebrated her now whispered about her in grocery stores and coffee shops. Her reputation, the thing she had valued above everything else, was utterly destroyed. But the financial reckoning was even more severe. My father, with help from a lawyer Valerie recommended, discovered that under Connecticut law he had grounds for a civil suit against his mother. The money she had extracted through deliberate deception could potentially be recovered. It would be an ugly, painful process, dragging family business through court, but my father was determined. Grandma Maggie hired her own lawyer, of course, and initially she was defiant, insisting she would fight to the last breath. But as the evidence mounted and her lawyer saw the strength of our case, the advice changed. A settlement was proposed. Grandma Maggie would return $150,000 to my parents, transfer ownership of the rental house to my father, and agree to a structured payment plan for the remainder. In exchange, we would not pursue further legal action. My father accepted the settlement, but he made one additional demand. He wanted a written admission from his mother of what she had done, witnessed and notarized, so that if she ever tried to revise history, there would be a document proving the truth. Grandma Maggie balked at this, but her lawyer convinced her it was the only way forward. In a sterile conference room with lawyers on both sides, she signed a document admitting that she had deliberately misrepresented her financial situation to her son over a period of 15 years, extracting money under false pretenses. It wasn't quite a criminal confession, but it was an acknowledgement, a permanent record of her deceit. I was present for that signing, and I watched my grandmother's hand shake as she put pen to paper. She looked up at me with hatred in her eyes, pure and undisguised. And in that moment, I saw the woman who had lived behind the mask all along. There was no love in her, no warmth, nothing but cold calculation and bottomless resentment. Daniel was the most difficult casualty of this whole affair. He went through stages of grief, denial, anger, bargaining, depression. He had built so much of his identity around being Grandma Maggie's favorite, around believing that she saw something special in him that others didn't. To learn that her affection had been just another manipulation, another way to divide and control the family, was devastating. I gave him space, but I also reached out, again and again, reminding him that I loved him, that none of this was his fault, that he had been a victim just like the rest of us. Slowly, over months, he began to come around. He cut ties with Grandma Maggie entirely, refusing to take her calls, returning her letters unopened. It was painful for him, but it was also necessary for his healing. My parents' marriage, which had seemed on the verge of collapse, actually grew stronger in the aftermath. They started couples therapy, working through the years of resentment and miscommunication. My mother learned to express her needs more directly, and my father learned to listen, really listen, without filtering everything through his mother's expectations. It wasn't a fairy tale ending, and there were still hard days, but they were facing them together. As for Grandma Maggie, she retreated into isolation. She sold the commercial building to pay the settlement and lived alone in her house, visited by no one, pitied by few. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she had started telling a different version of events, painting herself as the victim of a family conspiracy, but no one believed her anymore. The evidence was too clear, the witnesses too numerous, her own signed admission too damning. She never apologized, not once. I had hoped, perhaps naively, that facing the truth would force some moment of reckoning, some flicker of genuine remorse. But that wasn't who she was. She was a woman who had spent her entire life prioritizing herself above everyone else, using love as a weapon and kindness as a mask. She died the way she had lived, bitter, alone, and unrepentant. I found out about her death from a neighbor who called my father. She had passed in her sleep, apparently peacefully, though I wondered how peaceful the end could be for someone who had caused so much pain. The funeral was small, attended only by a handful of people who felt obligated rather than grieved. My father gave a brief eulogy, speaking in general terms about life and death and the complications of family. He didn't pretend she was a saint. He didn't condemn her either. He simply acknowledged that she had existed, and now she was gone. I stood at that graveside watching them lower her into the ground, and I thought about the woman I had believed her to be versus the woman she truly was. I thought about all the birthdays and holidays and Sunday dinners, all the times she had held my face in her hands and told me I was special. Had any of it been real? I would never know for certain, and perhaps it didn't matter anymore. What mattered was that my family had survived. We had looked into the darkness, named it, and refused to let it consume us. My parents were together and healing. My brother was finding his own path, free from the distorted expectations that had been imposed on him. And I had discovered something about myself. I was stronger than I ever knew, capable of facing the ugliest truths and still standing. Kevin and I got married the following spring in a small ceremony attended by the people who truly loved us. My father walked me down the aisle, his eyes wet with tears of joy rather than sorrow. My mother sat in the front row, beaming with a pride that had nothing to do with anyone else's expectations. Daniel stood as a groomsman, still finding his way but present, connected, part of the family again. In my wedding speech, I talked about love and trust, about the importance of seeing people clearly and choosing them anyway. I didn't mention my grandmother by name, but everyone who had been through the past year understood what I meant. We had been tested, and we had emerged not unscathed, but stronger, more honest, more willing to fight for what mattered. That was 5 years ago. Today, my parents are enjoying a comfortable retirement, their finances rebuilt through careful planning and the settlement money. My father never fully recovered from the betrayal. There are still days when I catch him staring at old photographs with an expression of profound loss. But he has my mother and he has us, and he is learning to let that be enough. Daniel met a wonderful woman named Sarah, and they have a baby boy now, my nephew, Thomas Jr., named after my father. Watching Daniel become a parent has been a revelation. He is attentive and loving, determined to break the cycle, to raise his son without the manipulation and control that shaped his own childhood. Every time I see him with that baby, I feel hope for the future. As for me, I teach 4th grade now, having moved up a year when my favorite colleague retired. I see so many children who come from complicated families, who carry burdens they shouldn't have to carry, who don't yet understand the dynamics shaping their lives. I try to be a safe space for them, a voice that says they are worthy of love exactly as they are. No conditions, no manipulation, just simple and genuine care. I think about my grandmother sometimes, in quiet moments. I wonder what made her the way she was, what wounds from her own past had curdled into cruelty. I'll never know the full story, and I've made peace with that. Understanding doesn't mean forgiving, and sometimes the healthiest thing you can do is simply let go. But I refuse to let her be forgotten, and that's why I'm sharing this story. There are others out there living what I lived, others whose trusted family members are slowly poisoning everything they touch. If even one person hears this and recognizes their own situation, if even one person finds the courage to start asking questions and demanding answers, then everything we went through will have meaning beyond our own family's pain. The truth matters. It might be ugly, it might be devastating, it might upend everything you thought you knew, but it is always, always better than the lie. Because when you know the truth, you can finally start to heal. When you know the truth, you can protect yourself and the people you love. When you know the truth, you take back the power that was stolen from you, and you build something new and honest and real. My grandmother spent her whole life constructing a beautiful fiction, and in the end, it all crumbled to dust. The only thing that remains is the truth, and that truth belongs to us now. We are the ones who get to tell the story. We are the ones who decide what it means. And that, in the end, is the truest form of justice. Not vengeance, not cruelty, but simply the courage to speak the truth and let the consequences fall where they may. The mask is off. The performance is over. And we, the ones who were fooled and hurt and nearly broken, we are still standing. We are still here. We are still a family. That's what she never understood. She thought she was the center, the indispensable one, the puppet master without whom everything would fall apart. But she was wrong. The family she tried to destroy is stronger without her. The love she tried to corrupt has proven more resilient than her hate. And the legacy she leaves behind is not the one she intended, not the image of a beloved matriarch, but a cautionary tale about the poison that can hide behind the sweetest smile. Some nights, I dream of her. In the dreams, she's young, younger than I ever knew her, and she's reaching out to me with something like tenderness in her eyes. I want to believe there was a time when she was capable of real love, when she wasn't yet the monster she would become. Maybe there was. Maybe the tragedy is that she started out as human as any of us and made choices, one after another, that led her further and further into darkness until there was no way back. I wake from those dreams with a complex mix of emotions, sadness, anger, and a strange kind of pity that I didn't think I was capable of feeling for her. But when morning comes and I hold my husband's hand across the breakfast table, when I call my mother and hear laughter in her voice, when I watch my brother play with his son, the feelings settle into something quieter and more stable. Gratitude, peace, the knowledge that we survived. There's a framed photograph on my desk at school, one of the few from my childhood that I kept after everything came out. It shows the whole family at a picnic, years before I understood anything about the dynamics at play. My grandmother is in the picture, smiling her signature smile, her arm around my father. But I don't look at her when I see that photo. I look at the rest of us, the way we're leaning toward each other, the genuine joy on our faces. That joy was real, even if she wasn't. And I choose to believe that the love we share now, honest and clear-eyed and hard-won, is the legacy that will endure. So here I am at the end of this long story, and I want to leave you with one final thought. If there's someone in your life who makes you feel small, who takes and takes while pretending to give, who keeps you bound through guilt and manipulation rather than genuine affection, pay attention. Trust your instincts. Look for the evidence. Talk to the people around you and ask if they see what you see. You are not crazy. You are not ungrateful. You are not the problem. And you deserve to know the truth, however painful it might be. My grandmother was a thief, not just of money, but of peace and trust and family cohesion. She built her throne on our backs and expected us to thank her for the privilege. But in the end, the throne toppled and we rose from the wreckage. We took back what was ours. Our story, our relationships, our future. She's gone now, buried beneath a stone that bears her name and the words, beloved mother and grandmother. Someday, no one will remember her at all. But we will remember what we learned, what we overcame, and what we built in the aftermath. And that memory, that legacy, will be far more powerful and far more lasting than anything she ever tried to create. This is the truth about my grandmother, the woman who secretly destroyed my family. This is the story of how we exposed her and set ourselves free. And this is my testimony for anyone who needs to hear it, that the liars do not win in the end. The truth always comes out, and justice, though it may be slow and imperfect, has a way of finding its mark. Thank you for listening. May your own truth set you free.